When Love Became Labor, the Day I Took Back My Life. Chapter 1. A Love Like No Other. Sarah had always believed in love. Growing up, she watched her parents live out a storybook romance, and she longed for the day when she would find someone who would make her heart race in the same way. When she met David, she thought she had found that person. David was everything she had ever dreamed of. Charming, intelligent, and endlessly caring. From the moment they met, there was a connection between them that felt almost magical. They would spend hours talking about their hopes, dreams, and plans for the future. He would surprise her with thoughtful gestures, and his attentiveness made Sarah feel like the most special person in the world. Their courtship was a whirlwind of romance, and before long, David proposed. Their wedding was an extravagant celebration of love, filled with family, friends, and laughter. As they exchanged vows, Sarah believed with all her heart that this was the beginning of her happily ever after. Chapter 2. The cracks begin to show. The first few months of their marriage were blissful. Sarah and David moved into a cozy house in a quiet neighborhood, and they spent their weekends exploring new places, trying out new recipes, and planning their future together. David was the perfect husband. He would cook with Sarah, clean up after dinner, and they would end their evenings curled up on the couch, talking about their day. But as time passed, Sarah began to notice small changes in David's behavior. It started with little things. David began coming home later than usual, citing work as the reason. He stopped helping with the cooking and cleaning, and the thoughtful gestures that once made Sarah feel cherished became less frequent. Sarah tried to brush it off, thinking it was just a phase, but the changes only became more pronounced. David's demeanor shifted. He no longer seemed interested in their conversations, and his patience wore thin more quickly. He would spend hours on his phone or watching TV, barely acknowledging Sarah's presence. When Sarah tried to talk to him about her feelings, he dismissed her concerns, telling her that she was overreacting, or that this was just how marriage was supposed to be. Sarah felt a growing sense of unease. She had always imagined marriage as a partnership, where both partners shared responsibilities and supported each other. But now, it seemed like she was the only one putting in the effort. She found herself taking on more and more of the household duties, cooking, cleaning, grocery shopping, managing the bills, while David seemed content to let her handle everything. Chapter 3. The Weight of Responsibility. As the months turned into years, Sarah's frustration grew. The man she had married, the man who had once made her feel like the most important person in the world, now seemed distant and indifferent. The love that had once defined their relationship now felt like a heavy burden, and Sarah began to feel like she was carrying the weight of their marriage on her own. David's expectations of Sarah became more demanding. He would come home from work and expect dinner to be ready, the house to be spotless, and all the household chores to be done. When Sarah asked for his help, he would shrug it off, saying that she was better at those things or that he was too tired. Sarah felt like she was living with a stranger, a man who no longer saw her as an equal partner, but rather as someone who existed to make his life easier. The stress began to take a toll on Sarah's health. She was constantly exhausted, both physically and emotionally. She started losing weight, her hair began to thin, and she developed chronic headaches. She tried to talk to David about how she was feeling, but he would just tell her to take a day off work or go to the spa to relax. He didn't seem to understand, or care, how deeply unhappy she was. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point. The final straw came one evening when Sarah had just returned home after a grueling day at work. She was exhausted, her head was pounding, and all she wanted to do was lie down and rest. But when she walked into the house, she found David sprawled on the couch, watching TV, with dirty dishes piled up in the sink and laundry strewn across the floor. Sarah's heart sank. She had asked David to take care of the household chores that day, as she had an important project at work, and knew she wouldn't have the energy to do everything when she got home. But it was clear that David had ignored her request. Fighting back tears, Sarah asked David why he hadn't done the chores. David barely glanced up from the TV and muttered something about how he had been too tired after work. Sarah felt a surge of anger and sadness. She had always tried to be understanding and supportive, but at that moment she realized that David had stopped caring about her feelings long ago. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Sarah felt a sense of hopelessness wash over her. She couldn't continue living like this, feeling neglected, unappreciated, and taken for granted. She had always believed that marriage was about love, respect, and partnership, but her marriage had become a one-sided arrangement, where she was the only one putting in any effort. Chapter 5. The Decision. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a sense of clarity. She knew she couldn't go on like this. She loved David, but she couldn't continue to live in a marriage where she felt more like a maid than a wife. She needed to take control of her life and stand up for herself. After David left for work, Sarah sat down at the kitchen table with a pen and paper. She wrote a letter to David, pouring out all the feelings she had been bottling up for years. She wrote about how much she loved him, but how deeply hurt she was by his behavior. She told him that she couldn't continue to carry the weight of their marriage alone, and that something needed to change. Sarah left the letter on the dining table, along with a note saying that she would be out for the evening, and that they would talk when she returned. Then, for the first time in months, she did something for herself. She called up a few friends and made plans to go out that night. She needed to clear her head and remind herself of who she was outside of her marriage. Chapter 6. The Confrontation. When Sarah returned home that night, she found David sitting at the dining table, the letter she had written clutched in his hand. His face was pale, and he looked more serious than she had seen him in a long time. They sat down together, and for the first time in years, they had an honest conversation. Sarah spoke about the pain and loneliness she had been feeling, about how she felt like she was no longer his partner but his servant. She told him that she couldn't continue to live like this, and that if things didn't change, she would have to consider leaving. David listened quietly, his eyes filled with regret. He admitted that he had taken Sarah for granted and that he had been selfish in his actions. He told her that he loved her and that he wanted to make things right. He apologized for the way he had treated her and promised to do better. But Sarah knew that words alone wouldn't be enough. She told David that if they were going to make their marriage work, they needed to go to counseling and start rebuilding their relationship from the ground up. David agreed, realizing that this was his last chance to save his marriage. Chapter 7. Rebuilding and Rediscovering. The road to rebuilding their marriage was not easy. Sarah and David began attending couples counseling, where they learned how to communicate more effectively and address the issues that had been festering for so long. David began to take on more responsibilities around the house, and they started to work together as a team again. It was a slow process, and there were moments when Sarah doubted whether their marriage could truly be saved. But over time, she began to see changes in David. He became more attentive, more considerate, and more willing to share the load. He started surprising her with little gestures of love again, like bringing home flowers or planning a weekend getaway. They started going on dates again, rediscovering the joy they had once found in each other's company. Sarah also began to take better care of herself. She started setting boundaries, making time for her own hobbies and interests, and not being afraid to ask for help when she needed it. She realized that she didn't have to do everything on her own, and that it was okay to rely on David as a partner. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but it was stronger than it had been in a long time. Sarah and David were both committed to making it work, and they knew that as long as they continued to communicate openly and support each other, they could overcome any challenges that came their way. Chapter 8. A New Beginning. As the years passed, Sarah and David's marriage continued to grow and evolve. They had weathered the storm, and now they were standing on solid ground. They celebrated their anniversaries with gratitude, knowing that they had fought hard to keep their love alive. Sarah often thought back to that night when she had written the letter that changed everything. It had been a turning point in their marriage, a moment when she had taken control of her life and demanded the respect and partnership she deserved. She was proud of the woman she had become, and she was grateful for the love and commitment that David had shown in the years since. Together, they built a life filled with love, laughter, and mutual respect. They supported each other through life's ups and downs, knowing